right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for coming to our session on data informed data informed collaboration. My name is Allison Fleming, and I'm here from Penn State University. And I'm with my colleague Brian Phillips from Utah State. And we're here to share a model of sustained collaboration among educators, VR counselors, and community rehab providers to improve outcomes for youth with disabilities. So just to start, when I hear people talk about collaboration in transition spaces, it's often full of criticism that we're not collaborating or that we should be doing a better job and we're not. And we just want to say that we're starting from a premise where we don't meet people in Brian and I's work that we've been doing with states for the past few years where people don't want to collaborate. So we're not seeing that. We're not meeting people who are saying, I'm a teacher, forget those community rehab providers, I'm not interested. We meet people who are very interested, but we also meet people who are in a challenging context for collaboration. So we're going to start with explaining that a little bit more. So also the work that we're sharing with you today comes out of a project that Brian and I have been working on for about 5 years now. We, at the kind of behest of a VR agency in Utah, we have come up with a set of progress tools that are closely aligned with the pre-ED's core services. And we've been lucky enough to work with a few more states to implement those tools in states so that providers and agencies have a better idea of how students in their states getting pre-EDs are growing as a result of the pre-EDs that are being provided. And the work that we're going to talk about today is an extension of that. So we're very excited to be here to share that with you. So back to this transition context, which Brian and I, after working closely with states for the last few years, I feel reasonably confident that we know something about because we've talked to enough people by now, or hopefully we've learned something from them. Yeah. And what we've learned in those years, again, is that it's not that people don't want to be collaborating, they don't want to be working together, but they're in this space of really significant strain. So for one, turnover really, has been an issue for a long time, but we're seeing it as a more critical issue now. And when we think about transition teams, it's not just turnover of VR counselors, like we talk about in our spaces, but when we multiply that times turnover in special education and turnover in community rehab providers, we're seeing these teams that are in constant flux. So that's not really setting us up for success and collaboration, especially when often the emphasis in improving collaboration comes to, well, we need to work closer together, we need to meet more often, we need to build relationships, because the people in those relationships are not the same. So we don't have a chance to do that. Second, we see that due to higher caseloads and higher strains, we also have less time available. We've been asked to do more with less, serve more students, serve more clients for years. And now we're in a space where we have very little ability to do anything but the main functions. And when we go back to what we talk about in collaboration and building collaborations, often those things are spending extra time and meeting people and going places and having in-person meetings. And that's very time consuming. And it's frankly time that many folks just don't have. And third, we're looking at these siloed data systems. So we've each got our own set of data metrics that we're collecting, our own assessments that we do. And because we need to protect students' information, those data systems are all very walled off, as is a good thing for security purposes. Also, the information that we do collect in terms of data isn't necessarily very meaningful to our partners. So for example, I was a VR counselor. I worked with a lot of schools. I would get sent these IEPs and they were like this big. Probably this much. It was the part that was meaningful to me. The rest of it, I didn't understand, or wasn't useful to me in my role. And that meant that I was going to be redoing some of the same assessments that maybe the teacher already did because it didn't make sense to me. So we don't have this unified way to collect data on students and all use that same data together to provide services. So we're talking about, a new model for collaboration, not because we think that people aren't trying hard enough or they don't want to do this, but because we're in a space where I think we have to accept that trying to do the same thing over and over just isn't working. We need to find a new way to address these issues. So with that, I will make it your turn.
Thank you. I'm not going to touch that mic again. Luckily, we're about the same. So when we think about collaboration and all of the efforts that have been made over the previous decades, and we haven't seen sustained collaboration actually occurring in our states, at our agencies, we started to think a little bit harder. And one moment that was really important for us was a moment where we thought about hospital settings. Appreciate it or not, hospitals are a constant machine of collaboration. In fact, so much collaboration that if I show up to a hospital and my doctor's out sick, I might still have my appointment. Because why? There's a set of data that's anchoring the collaboration. And that got us thinking, if hospitals can collaborate without a Friday taco party every once in a while to remind each other who we are, or without keeping a good list of who I work with and whether they have kids and birthdays that I should remember, which is all pretty impossible with the level of turnover we experience, maybe data is the answer. And so for a moment, I'd like to just mention a traditional approach to collaboration in contrast to a data-informed approach to collaboration. And I'll just say one more thing before I go further. We say data-informed purposely instead of data-driven because we believe the clinician will still drive services regardless of whether there's data or not. And I don't love the idea of data driving us anywhere without a clinician's judgment. And so we choose purposely to call it a data-informed collaboration rather than a data-driven collaboration. But if you look here, traditional approaches are relationship dependent. Data-informed approaches are data anchored. In some sense, we might suggest that a data-informed approach is turnover resistant collaboration. That's another term we've been using a lot, looking for ways that we can intervene in a way that's turnover resistant. We have meeting intensive needs with traditional collaboration, more outcome oriented elements when we have data informed collaboration. Traditional collaboration has tried to be achieved mostly through compliance data. This is actually pretty important to slow down on. Yes, VR has plenty of data, and so does education. But that data is often built for the systems that they're in, not built truly to be used by outsiders and appreciated. And so frankly, oftentimes we put in years of work to develop MOUs, only ask the question after we get the MOU in place, what the heck do I actually want from you and what would I do with it? Do I have anything to offer you in return that would be beneficial to you? And we might find at times that because our data is built for our own systems, that sharing isn't as meaningful as we'd hope it to be. And of course, we mentioned disrupted by turnover, where data-informed collaboration is not. And feel free to interrupt at any point. We have the ability to bring the mic around or just to repeat your questions. We love this to be as interactive as we can. All right, so some guiding principles of data-informed collaboration include these three. First, there has to be cross-agency utility. There has to be value for all stakeholders. We've already talked about this, but it can't be data that is for me, by me. It has to be for all of us. And that requires some pre-planning. That requires some thinking right out of the gate to say, what is the shared metric we care about? What is it we hope to achieve together? What would be the data that would carry that effort? Number two, actionable data. So it can't just be, did we do what we were supposed to do and are we compliant kind of data? It has to be the kind of data that tells me I'm a practitioner. Because of this data, I know a little bit more of what I could do today with the client I'm serving. If it's not at that level, we don't believe it meets the full definition of data-informed collaboration. It's got to move us to action, not just compel us to report. And then last of all, shared outcomes. This is so easy to do with PREAs. Now, one thing that we were nervous about, Alice and I, Allison mentioned, we developed some tools. For 5 years, we've been working on this with VR and Prius. We've got those 5 core services. We built around those. But there was a time, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, where we thought, we don't know what educators need in this space. But thankfully, as we'll begin to talk, we found a very open audience and a very interested set of parties where we do have a lot of shared outcomes that we desire. We have a lot of things we're working on that we both have an interest in, as well as our community rehab providers, our independent living partners, and many others. Okay, so what does it take? These are great ideas, but where does the data come from? You have to have the right tools in place to have data-informed collaboration. And so for just a moment, I'd like to talk through what those tools have been as we have built out our initial pilot. First of all, and I'll go a little out of order, I'll go from right to left here, the Transition Readiness Toolkit are those progress assessments. They are measuring pre-post change within students. I just want to slow down here for a moment. Do you know how long it took us, even though we have a clear answer of what the 5 core pre-ed services are? We went out and started talking to providers across states and said, what do you do for each of those core services? The differentiation, the variety was amazing. But even more interesting than that was, what are you trying to achieve from each one of these services that we might measure right out of the gate? The lazy answer that we've always gone to is employment. And in pre-eds, you say employment someday. And that sounds really limiting. And so we pushed harder and said, no, if you did a really great job with this service, what would be different about that student immediately after services compared to when they started your services? That starts to frame or shape the shared metrics that we're working on together. Yes, we want employment at some point, but when we're talking about pre-employment transition services, we want stuff in between. This is really critical. When you think about health settings, there was many years where we just watched for whether they lived or they died. And then we started to make up a story about it afterwards. And usually if they died, the story was they weren't motivated. And we can resonate with some of that sometimes. And if they lived, we made up some story about what worked. And sometimes I was drinking out of a goat's skull. Other times it was something more meaningful, but we had to just make up a story. The only way you can have services that a practitioner can start to utilize in constructive ways is when you measure the process that got you to the outcome. And that was very challenging to do in pre-eds because we just haven't spent a lot of time asking the question, what am I changing in the core service? I'm delivering it and I want there to be employment someday, but what am I changing? So the Transition Readiness Toolkit helps us to do that. The Transition Planning Tool is essentially just a brief version of our Transition Readiness Toolkit that combines all of the 5 core services and allows us to look at all of these areas as a snapshot and know where to start working with a student. And then this wasn't necessarily on purpose, but I like how it looks as a foundation to all of this is cloud-based platforms. When Alice and I started doing this 5 years ago, initially in Utah, when we were doing this, they would fill out a survey and like Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey. I would take that data and all I could do, because I was teaching classes and all the things that many of you out here are doing, I was crunching those numbers about once every 3 months. And then I was sending out reports to all the agencies about the same intervals every 3 months. And they said, Brian, this is great, but it's 3 months too late for me to help the client that I needed to help with the data. And so what we really appreciated is if you're going to do this well, you're going to have real-time feedback with your data. If it's going to be data informed, it has to be data informed and on time. And so one thing that we've been building out with the data informed collaboration is a system that can give back immediate responsive feedback so that a provider can ask for data and then have an understanding of what to do with that data that comes back right afterwards. Okay, so just for a moment, I want to pause here because I think Tim Tanzi, I'd give him a shout out. I think he's in a presentation. Someone tell him I said something nice about him. That'll win me a point. He talked about how we need to be asking, what can I do to help your agency? What do you need from us? That really has been the secret sauce of this whole experience for us. I don't mean to belittle Alice and Bob, belittle me. I haven't had a single good idea of this process, but I've listened a lot and Allison's listened a lot, and we've heard a lot of great ideas we've implemented. And that's been really the magic of this for us. And so co-development couldn't be a bigger emphasis. It was created with VR agencies, educators, and a lot of community rehab providers. We truly believe that the people in the trenches every day doing pre-ets are most likely the ones to have insights about what we need to be doing with our practices. Now, they don't have the systematic, sophisticated measurement to show what's working and not working, but you can bet that day after day, they're finding new, better ways to do pre-ets that we need to be listening to. And sure enough, they give us a lot of good insights. We need to align with those requirements that they're held to. So in our case, that was pre-ets, WIOA more largely, and other federal law. User testing, our first iteration of this tool, now I look back at it and I kind of laugh because it was really pathetic. But the fact that we applied it with people who are day-to-day users and they gave us feedback meant that in 5 years, it's actually become something that I feel pretty proud of. Not because we thought it, but because we tested it and they fixed it, they improved it. And then continuous improvement has really been the linchpin of all of this. And one thing I have to say, in this data-informed collaboration, we found that the technical assistance has to be there. So in this experience, we have full-time folks who just dedicate themselves to nothing more than answering questions of providers on what the data means, how the tool works, and how they can move forward with their agency. With that, I'll turn it back over to Allison to talk us through a case study.
Thanks, Brian. So with that, I think hopefully a helpful foundation for you and hearing about the work we've been doing with our progress tools and then the transition planning tool, we thought it would help us to walk through an example of how this could look with a student. So with this case study example, we're going to walk through kind of the steps. So the first one would be to use that planning tool as an initial assessment. Teachers do this all the time. They are the ones who drive transition planning. And when Ryan and I took the planning tools to educators, as he said, we weren't really sure if this was going to align with the things that they were interested in and the things that they had to put into transition plans. And we were pleasantly surprised when they said, yeah, this is great. And adding to that, I think in VR spaces, we do spend more time training folks to do transition in special ed. Special ed is very broad. It goes from birth to 21. So there's less time and space in that curriculum and teacher prep to help folks know how to do transition. So we actually found that teachers were very happy to have this resource because they have to do the transition assessment, they have to start that planning process, and they don't necessarily have the right tools to do that. That planning tool can help the team with prioritizing services. So at 14, it's likely and expected that students would need a lot of transition services and supports to help them understand what work is, know their own strengths, their own interests. And a tool like this can help guide that process and customize it to each individual student. We also see that we can use data in this way in order to monitor progress. So that IEP team meets every year. Isn't it cool that they can look back to the data that's been collected based on last year's goals and actually see how much growth a student has had? It's a moment of celebration every year. And then a decision about, okay, what's next? And then finally, hopefully the ideal outcome is that this intentional iterative process makes it more likely that students will reach their transition goals and their employment goals in the future. So we're going to use the example of Olivia and explore her process starting in 9th grade through high school and how data-informed collaboration can help customize her special ed services to meet her unique needs and context. So here's Olivia. She's a 9th grader at Bayside High School. You guys Saved by the Bell fan, Brian? And Olivia has some learning disabilities that affect her reading and writing. She lives with mom and brother in low-income housing. Mom works 2 jobs, so providing a really strong example of work ethic and the value of work in that family. Olivia likes to draw, she likes to play music, and she plays volleyball. Her current levels of supports in ninth grade are that she receives special education and general classes, and then she has some resource room setting specialized services. Let's look at how that initial assessment can inform future goals and plans. So we're using that transition planning tool before that first IEP meeting, and it covers these 9 assessment areas that are aligned with Priyat's core services, and then that can inform team decisions. So when someone does a planning tool, this is a screenshot of the kinds of results that they get to use. As Brian mentioned, it's really important that if you're collecting data, that practitioners can use it, and it actually helps them with their critical decision making. And so here we see that Olivia's results show on these 9 indicators that she has some real strengths. And then she has some areas where she feels less confident and less skilled at this point, which again, for a ninth grader is totally expected. So it gives us some insights about what kinds of goals we should be setting. So for Olivia, her strongest areas seem to be those at the bottom. So communication and social skills, independent living, self-advocacy, pretty strong for her. Some of the other areas such as job seeking, counseling on post-secondary enrollment, and job exploration, much less confident at this point. Totally expected for a ninth grader. So how do we use that to set her goals? So her team, when they meet, an input from Olivia, mom, maybe her brother if he's available, decides that they want her post-secondary goal to be competitive integrated employment. And for her annual goals, the team has decided that the first step should be to do some researching careers and then an academic goal because of her limitations in reading and writing. In terms of transition services, this translates into some career exploration activities really consistent with that profile that we saw in the planning tool. So they planned some activities such as job shadowing, informational interviews, and workplace tours for Olivia. And they've matched her up with a pre-ETS specialist to really focus on that job exploration based on that planning tool results. So then what happens? Olivia works with Tammy. Tammy then transitions from that planning tool to the progress tools that Brian mentioned earlier. And in those pre-post assessments, the first step would be to do a baseline so that Tammy now has a sense for where Olivia is and then can plan services accordingly. She, continues to provide that service, and the team is all kept in the loop because they all have access to the same data that Olivia is generating through her use of those tools. And they can work together offline as well. So in this story, Olivia is at school and she makes some comment like, yeah, I have a meeting with Tammy, but I just don't know if there are any jobs out there for me, which would feel discouraging, knowing that you're doing all this assessment of job exploration. So a team member overhears this and reaches out to Tammy to say, hey, how is it going? Olivia kind of made this comment, I really wasn't sure. So as a result of that, Tammy says, well, why don't we do a check? So we do a post test to see how much Olivia has grown or gained through her job exploration services. That prompts Tammy to do some adjusting based on the feedback that she got. And they continue at the end of the year, they do a post assessment, and it seems like Olivia's really had significant growth in her career awareness. The team says, yeah, that's pretty good for ninth grade. Let's look again at next goals and go from there. So as is common in many transition plans, another goal that the team set was related to self-advocacy. And through this assessment process, they were again able to see where Olivia has some existing strengths. And so for Olivia, that aligned with not being afraid to speak up if she felt like she was being treated unfairly, feeling like she could say her opinion. It also identified some growth areas for her, and in particular, her ability to explain her support needs to others. So again, following the same process of baseline assessment, services to track progress, and again, checking those outcomes. And the key here is that all members of the team have access to that same data. So it's meaningful data to everybody, but also available to everybody. So we're not starting over every year and saying, oh, what did Olivia do last year? I can't remember. Can you? Olivia, what'd you do? Well, I mean, Olivia's in 9th grade. She does not know if you've worked with kids. So it gives you a strong anchoring point for the team to consult and check back and really get to see growth over time, which is really exciting. So some potential benefits that we see, and then Brian will pick it up and talk about the pilot where we've gotten more feedback on this process, is that, this data can actually initiate collaboration because it brings the team together with a common understanding of Olivia or the student and their particular situation. It helps clarify roles because if I'm looking at the same data that you're looking at and you can see that I'm doing job exploration, that means that you can do something else and we're not duplicating services. We're not all trying to do the same thing at the same time, which provides possibility of more services for Olivia, but also more streamlined experience for her. It also helps make sure that the right person on the team is doing the service. When we're on transition teams, we have, again, that special education person, we have the VOCREA person, we got the CRP, and there's less pressure really on the teacher to feel like they have to do it all because it's not their training to do it all. And when we talk to teams, I always say, thank goodness that I don't have to teach anyone to read because that's not been my training. I don't know how to do that. So I'm glad that I'm not asked to. And if your training has not been job exploration or job development or job coaching, then it's not fair to ask you to do that either. That's where the team comes in. We can take those responsibilities because that's what we do over here. And that means you don't have to. And then finally, ensuring continuity. As we talked about with turnover, those teams are not stable, but the information's stable. So that stays with Olivia and can be used in perpetuity until she graduates and exist available to all. That's what we see as the potential benefits. I'll turn it back over to you, Brian, to walk us through that pilot.
Thank you.
There we go.
I think I'll make one clarifying point, just in case people are looking at one of the slides, and I was supposed to share this and I didn't. No, it's on me. Those 9 areas, I mentioned 5 core pre-ET services. And so just briefly, I'll explain that there's 9 areas of pre-ETs, not because we went rogue and went outside of WIOA. It's because workplace readiness training is not a service. It's a set of services. WIOA states it that way. Providers treat it that way. But if you're measuring only by what am I trying to change, and it's multiple things or a set of services, you have to measure those services separately for it not to be gobbledygook, to use a non-scientific term. And so we wanted to get rid of that gobbledygook by spending a lot of time asking the providers, when you do workplace readiness training, what are you doing? And it resulted in a breakdown of 5 sub-services that fit underneath workplace readiness training, including things like independent living orientation and mobility training, including communication social skills training, financial literacy training, et cetera. So that's why you saw 9 up on the chart. I just thought I'd close that loop for anyone who was wondering what we were doing there. So the Utah project, this is actually really fun. We've been doing data collection in Utah for over 5 years now. We have over 40,000 student responses from across the country, zeroing in on 50,000 now. But at one point, the leaders for Utah State Board of Education said, we see all this cool stuff you're doing with data on the VR side. We want a piece. And that's where I'll just come back and say, well, this is a VR pre-ETS tool. I'm not sure how equipped we are. And then I learned something. And of course, if there's an educator out there, feel free to correct me. But educators speak about transition services. They don't tend to have a core set, certainly not a federally mandated core set. And one thing that they really welcomed in Utah and in some of those states we've been talking with were some boundaries, some structure. How do I think of what transition services means? Because transition services is a term that doesn't really inspire you to act without a little bit more structure. And so we took the 9 areas, the 5 core pre-ETs with 5 sub workplace readiness areas to the state and said, well, this is how we measure transition in the VR side for pre-ET services. But we don't want to limit you. If you think there's some different structure or different way to do this, let us know and we'll break from it. It just won't be as unified. The team looked at that. We had the whole Utah State Board of Education, several people on that board, and then lots of school district leadership and teachers looking at it. And they all came back to us saying, this is great structure and this is transition for us. One of the things that's really helped us, when we created the initial transition readiness toolkit items, we had to write everything at or below fourth grade reading level. And you know what? So I have two siblings who are special education teachers. We don't talk because they don't speak the language that I speak, and we do talk, but we have a hard time. We have to translate our conversations to each other through the jargon of our two fields, unnecessarily doing the same work, trying to help achieve the same outcomes. But when you put it into a fourth grade reading level, the jargon's gone. And what we found was that the educators reading our non-jargon pre-ETS approach at a fourth grading level said, this is exactly what we're doing. And in fact, it clarifies what we're doing and helps us to appreciate with a little bit more structure what it is we're trying to achieve. And so we were really grateful to hear that because we did this project launch, 2024? So this hasn't been nearly as long in set up. This is where we did the initial training. One nice thing about this, as Allison mentioned earlier, teachers are really versed in all things assessment. And so talking to them about adding a tool that would just be very employment driven was no problem for them. We had very few questions. We had a really easy time for the most part with initial implementation. They started to use the tool across 9 schools in Utah in the last quarter of 2024. And we all just held our breath and said, I hope this works, but maybe it won't, who knows? So we started tracking those student outcomes. And I just want to talk a little about what the experience has been. Oh, please, Chalet, and say it, and then I'll repeat it in the mic. Yeah, Chalet's question is really good. How did we decide to use a fourth grade reading level? Frankly, this is going to sound more pragmatic than scientific, but we were trying to get to the lowest grade level we could while still retaining like some of the complexity that pre-ETS requires us to ask about. And the lowest we could get was fourth grade. After that, the questions got too watered down. Like we lost sight of what we were doing with pre-ETS at below fourth grading level. Above that though was not necessary. Now I should tell you, because I took us down this path, we do have alternative forms of measurement. So we have an observer completion form where a VR counselor, an educator, a parent could fill it out on the behalf of the student. But we prefer the student voice as the priority where they can. We also have a assisted approach that we train, and we train it based on 3 areas: reading level, reading comprehension. I have 2 brothers with Down syndrome. One of them actually reads really well. He just doesn't comprehend what he's reading, and so it could be that they could read, but comprehension's limited. And the last one, very common in high school, but self-awareness, either too high or way too low. And so those are the things we say, if those elements are difficult, then we might need to pull back self-reporting so we can maintain accuracy. And that's just a kindness. It's my brother, I always refer to, Allison's heard me say this a billion times, but with Down syndrome, he's an elevated scorer. He thinks he's going to be great at everything he does. And I don't want to take that away from him, but I also don't want him filling out financial literacy saying I'm a perfect score on all these things and I can't count back change, because then he's not getting services based on data, because the data would suggest he's fine. And so the kindness of the data is to be as accurate as you can. But we believe that we should start with self-report. Where that's not possible, come to one of these other options. Does that make sense, Chalet? Okay. So when we started to implement this, what we learned was some good and some bad, as any pilot will have. So we don't want to sugarcoat this. But they started doing it as the initial transition assessment. Education agencies are required to do transition assessment right out of the gate, usually before a kid turns 16. In some states, it's as low as 14. And yet, a lot of the transition assessments don't do a lot that taps into employment, especially not into pre-ETS services that are available to them. And so they'll go through all this transition assessment, and it won't give a clear bridge to what pre-ETS should a kid receive. And that's a sad loss of opportunity for data-informed collaboration. And so in this process of them filling it out, I think our best story, I'll start with the good news and then talk about some of the challenges we've had. Tim Tansy's doing the gritty across the stage. I'm just going to point that out. I couldn't help that. Okay. But one of our best moments was a teacher saying, I've been teaching for years, decades. In fact, I'm going to be doing a presentation with her in Utah next month. And she said, usually I tell parents, she's a huge believer in pre-ets. But she said, I tell parents their kid could use pre-ets. And she says, the parents usually are just like, that's one more thing. I don't need it, or I'm not going to take the time to do it. She said, for the first time when she took data to her parent meetings to show where the kid might benefit from pre-ets, she said this is the first year where every parent she met with committed to engaging in pre-et services because the parent could see quantitative data showing the kid's strengths and opportunities for growth. And I want to emphasize both. How often do we take time to quantitatively show a kid that they're good at something when they come into transition services? Every good sports coach, I'm looking at Trent Landon, who coaches year-round almost, it seems. Every good sports coach knows they're going to look for something that's good about that kid, and they're going to try to develop that, maybe even more so than try to fix some of the weaknesses. Now, they're going to do both. But I fear that in pre-ets, we're just in a constant churn of you're not there yet, and we're going to work on it. And so one of the great opportunities here is to tell a parent, your kid's great here, and to tell the kid that, of course, too. You're great here. Good for you. You're coming in your freshman year, and you're ahead of the curve when it comes to this service or that service. That's going to be a huge benefit to you when it gets closer to employment time. Let's just acknowledge that. And then let's talk about some opportunities for you to grow as well. When she did that in that situation, every parent that she talked to during that cycle of IEPs said they were going to sign up for pre-ed services. That was one of the big shining moments for us. That's a moment of data-informed collaboration in its initial stages. Anything I missed on this, Alice? Any other stories I tell? We're going to talk about some of the negative in the next slide. Okay. That's good. So some challenges. Data security. Everyone's asking about data security. What are we doing to protect data? One thing we've learned is that it's easier to collect data if you don't collect any personally identifying information. Now, the definition of this varies by state, but in most states, in fact, in the 9 states we're currently working in, using the student's case ID, or in the case of a school, their student ID, has not been constituted by their state's legal as PII. And so we can actually collect a whole ton of data that we have no idea who it's for. But the state, with their own access to that case management system, knows all the things they need to know about that student. Now, this has been really beautiful for a couple of reasons. One, it's helped us to avoid all kinds of legal battles. We haven't even had to work on an MOU in the last 5 years. We've just used the student ID that comes out of a case management system that's protected for that agency by that agency. Now, one of the things that we're going to be finishing up this summer that I'm really excited about is if case IDs are not PII, there's no one stopping us from matching case IDs from different systems. So our coding team this summer, in fact, they're almost done with it. I just threw one more twist into it that made it harder. But this summer, they're working on a situation where the educator or the VR counselor will get nudged to say, hey, if you're ready to match an ID, we'll help you with it. If they do a one-time match between the student ID at a school and the case ID at a VR agency, both systems will have access to all the data for both systems. That's a one-time match. So you do that once in their first year, you get to benefit from it from 4, 5, 6 years of the student's time in their schooling. So we have immediate data collaboration without having to involve the lawyers. And that's been a really beautiful, beautiful thing to plan for. The next stage is agency buy-in. This isn't required stuff. The 9 VR agencies, state VR agencies who are using the Transition Readiness Toolkit, we give them a lot of credit because they're doing something beyond anything RSA requires to measure actual quality of pre-ed services. The compliance requirement is spend. The additional opportunity aspirational requirement is quality. And so if any of you states are on, shout out to you for being willing to not just look at compliance that's required from RSA, but quality that exceeds that requirement. I think that's really awesome. But the agencies really do set the tone. In fact, in the 9 states we've been in, the agencies who say we're going to try this a lot of times what we get from the providers is, well, I'm going to resist because trying this sounds like it's going to go away. It's kind of like when I'm at all gray area with my kids going to bed, they're like, oh, if I just resist dad for a minute, I'm going to break him. And they're right. But when states say we're going to try this, it suggests that there's an option that we won't do this. But states who say we do care about quality, we're measuring it, and we're not going to stop measuring it, they're seeing the best outcomes and the most buy-in. And the last piece we will talk about is training needs. We aren't used to using data this way, to be honest. We aren't used to providers. Our state VR providers have been collecting 9/11 data out the wazoo for a long time, and WIOA just made it more intense in 2014. But data that circles back immediately to them and tells them how to improve their services, that's unique. And so there's been an opportunity. Every group who uses our tool is mandated to get trained in it before that they can use it so that they understand what to do with their data. That's not talking down to anyone. It's just saying, hey, this isn't something we're used to doing. It's probably not something you learned in your degree program. Let's just talk to you about what it means to use data within your services. And that's been a key for us and an opportunity for growth. Oh, thank you. Okay, so I kind of hit on this. I got ahead of myself in the slides, but a key for overcoming barriers is professional development, ongoing training, technical assistance. We have a lot of on-demand training that we provide. We have free and available 8 to 5 technical assistance we provide because we just really recognize if you're going to do something new and you're going to do it well in a system, you're going to keep it supported and trained. Leadership engagement. So we've had amazing partners out there across the country saying, we want to lean into this. We want to be part of this. They really are the heroes in the story. And then technical support. Okay, so that leads us to near conclusion, which is a little bit ahead of schedule. And that's good because we want to make sure there's some opportunity for dialogue. We could go off into some details of this if we want to, but we'd rather lead with any conversation that might come out of this. A few possible questions that we might ask, but we'd rather start with your own. What are your current transition collaboration practices, if anything, that might complement this or be aligned to this? We'd be very curious. How might you begin implementing data-informed strategies? Any additional comments or questions? So again, anything's fair game. We'd love to just hear from you. And Stacy, you're monitoring online if there's any questions. Okay, just want to make that invitation to anyone online. Feel free to add it to the chat. We'd love to include you as well. Yes, Shelley and then Peter. The staff training process? Yeah. Do you want to stand up here with me and do some of these? Yes. So Shelley just asked, would you tell us more about the staff training process and what that looked like? Maybe I'll do this. Maybe I'll do the TRT and then you do the TPT because that was. So I just want to be clear here. The transition readiness toolkit, a lot of pre-post measurement. That actually took a lot. That takes a lot more explanation, training, and practice with the software. And so we find that takes a 90-minute training. Usually that includes a little bit of time for them to practice and demo. We send them a demo of the site beforehand so they can really get into it and start to use it, try to break it, really get familiar with it. And then about 90 minutes is what we found it takes. But let me be clear again, 90 minutes followed by ever-ready technical assistance because we get calls every day. Across the 9 states, we get questions every day, and we have someone just always at the ready to answer those questions and support those individuals. And that's really been key for us. The transition planning tool. Now Tim is swimming across the stage back there. The transition planning tool is a little bit different story. So I'll have Allison explain that.
And thanks, Brian. And for that, I think the training shared some features. I mean, we still explained it and went through it, talked about administration, offered people the chance to practice. But I think because we were talking to teachers who do a lot of assessment, the uptake was a lot easier because they're looking for assessments because they have to do them for transition. And so this was just another one. So I don't think we had as many follow-up questions. Right,
no,
Brian?
we really didn't.
Yeah, but thank you for asking.
So, I'm wondering, in the course of doing this work, if there are partners that are a little bit hesitant about engaging,
Mhm.
what strategies have you found to be
Yeah.
effective in
Sure.
engaging those partners?
Sure. Thanks, Peter. So the question is, if there are partners that we meet when we're doing this work and they seem a little hesitant, what strategies do we use to engage them? So I'll start and then,
Please.
yeah, Brian, I'm sure we'll have other things to add. So I think when partners are hesitant, the first thing to do is to point out the usefulness to them. Because we're used to in our work collecting a lot of data, but it's not for us. We never get it back. We don't get to see it. And so I think we've had good success with showing partners, hey, you're meeting a student for the first time, you're doing this service. This pretest or baseline assessment helps you know what to do with a student because you get to see where are they very confident and where are they not. And that is additional information for you to help you customize your services from there, which we think is a good selling point. Would you add to that?
Just one thing.
Yeah.
We like to start with a state, getting a commitment from them that they won't use the data as a stick. That's our biggest point. And I think what we try to do to share that, actually, Allison and I share a story of us doing a pre-et service that we measured pre-post change, and we did a lot of work on this intervention. We were really proud of it. The only problem was the student scores either stayed the same or went down from our services. So we like to tell that story to tell them that we view that as a success still. Why? Because it got us one step closer to something that does work. And if our providers don't have that mindset, think about what the alternative is. It's doing the same thing over and over, believing that it worked when it didn't. I mean, that was the case of medical science for centuries. And we were okay with it because we didn't have better tools. We shouldn't be okay with it in VR now when we have better tools. But I think a key to that is to view this as a research and development opportunity. If we're going to look to the trenches for best insights, they have to have the bandwidth to try things that might work and might not work without being penalized or feeling like they're at risk of their jobs or a pay increase. And so when we do trainings, we make sure the state leadership is there and we ask them to take a moment to talk about how they're not going to use this as a penalizing tool or a measuring stick for whether people get a salary increase. And that's not going soft. We don't have good data to tell these providers what they should do. And so why would you penalize someone for doing their best regardless of what the outcome is right now, and we aren't offering them any better way? And so every good effort, every sincere effort, I should say, is good to us. Data that shows the scores went down is a wonderful breakthrough and insight, something for a provider to build on and celebrate. Something that goes well, of course, is easier to celebrate, and we know how to do that better, but both are great. And I think that's the key for us is what Allison said in combination with the fact that this is not meant to be your new evaluation tool for a salary bump. And if providers can really feel that, we know these providers want their students to get better. People who want that want data that would help them know if they're doing that. Stacy's got a question.
Someone at home is asking, how can you get access to the toolkit?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is the difficulty. Right now, the transition collaboration piece is a pilot stage. But the toolkit is available. They could email me or Allison. Our emails are in the slides. There is a cost to it, though. I want to just make clear. To do a product this well, to have technical support and assistance, we've got 3 coders always on this and technical assistance providers, customer success managers. There is a cost. So they can reach out to us and we can talk about that honestly and frankly. This isn't meant to be a sales pitch. We were wanting more to talk about the principle of data-informed collaboration and how much we believe in that than selling our own product. At the same time, we'd be happy to work with anybody who's interested. Okay, good Dr. Michael Accordino. That's a great question. So there's a lot we still need to learn about. I'm sorry. I get going into conversational mode, don't I? So Dr. Accordino asked whether there's any inter-rater reliability between agencies. Is that correct? Okay. So we have a lot more number crunching and work to do. Right now, what we know we have is a lot of internal reliability in the tools. We know we have a lot of faceability in the tools, and sometimes we poo-poo on that. But the fact is, we spent 5 years working with 6 states, including parents and youth. We had a grant that we won, allowed us to really spend time with parents and youth in developing the tools, state leadership, educational partners, and community rehab providers, independent living agencies. So there's a lot of that going on. One thing I'll just note here, within states, we're seeing actually quite a bit of variation in scores. But a lot of that's because of a word we don't use here, and that's dosage. Some of our partners are doing an hour of a single pre-ETS for a whole year. And that's just all they have. Either the school won't let them in for longer than that, and that's no one's fault, or they don't have the bandwidth. They're working with too many students to do much more than that, and that's just what they can do. Now, we're not here to shame anyone. We love anyone doing what they can do. We just want to build on these things. But we do see differences across agencies and states for sure. We promise to all of our states that we aren't going to point out negatives. We're going to go try to find positives and publish those things. We really think we'll win best, not by saying who isn't doing a best practice, but spotlighting who is doing a best practice and really trying to understand that better. Did that answer the question? Is there anything you would add to that? Okay, David Parker. You take it.
So the focus of your work seems to be how to evaluate students' progress through pre-ETS. It seems like there's so many related stories of success here, and I'm just curious. One is you succeeded. You also, it seems, very successful in teaching lots of people in different backgrounds how to use data to inform their practices. Again, whoa. And so I guess my question is, do you foresee opportunities to use your work to say more about those two related important ways of helping the field, or are you being asked yet? You know, let's put pre-ETS aside. How do you get agencies to collaborate? How do you get people to use the practices? That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not trying to suggest you need to take on more work, but there's so much more here that seems to be working. Us measuring the students' progress through pre-ETS, right? So how big is your thinking about what you might do with this incredible?
Oh, that's kind.
That's really kind. And I'm going to try to summarize that for the audience. I see Stacy making a nervous face at me. Yeah. So the question was, we talked a lot today about collaboration and getting partners to work together. We talked about getting folks who don't really use data much to use data. And those are really cool. But where do we see this going? Is that a fair? Okay. Gosh, I mean, Brian and I are so excited about this work and all the people that we've met in the years doing this, and they have some great ideas too. But just to give you a few thoughts about where we're headed, and I'll let Brian talk as his imagination is greater than mine. I mean, for me, I think helping more folks use data daily to inform their practice is really exciting. And I think having states and providers doing different versions of pre-ETS, but having the same metric is exciting, because that means that now we're not comparing apples and oranges. We're actually all using the same set of metrics, and we can start to see who's doing this really well and who's doing this really well for whom, because we get to see, are there agencies that have, more high intense need students and they're seeing good outcomes, or they've got a set of students where their baseline scores are notably lower than the average, but yet they're seeing growth. And that means that we can highlight and connect people who are doing similar work, experiencing similar challenges, and be able to learn from each other. And as Brian noted, none of the states that we're working with, they don't have a punishment mindset about this. They all have a growth mindset. But that also means that they can use this information to help providers grow through technical assistance, and maybe they can partner up folks. Someone's struggling with a service, someone's doing really well at it. I mean, those folks should be the ones learning from each other. Practices should bubble up from the folks doing the work, not from folks sitting at our desks typing, in my academic job. So I think that's really exciting. Brian, I'm going to save curriculum for you because that's something you're really excited about.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that question. I think we'll talk curriculum for just a minute, but the one other thing I'd like to just add a note is Pre-ETS gave us a really nice springboard for this because the Fed said there was 5 core services and gave something of a structure definition for that. That was a really meaningful place for us to start from. And it was a place where all the states agreed by federal requirement, we should start. When you look at adult services, there is a need to know what we're trying to change and how we're doing it. The problem is I've pulled all of the manuals I could get my hands on. I think I got something like 40 of the state VR manuals out there to start comparing how states defined the different services required under 9/11 data. That's a much heavier lift. A lot of differences, a much harder thing to cause people to say, we have agreement on what we're trying to achieve with this specific service. I mean, even something like career counseling in one state is viewed as something we do with every student, or every client we receive just by nature of that's who we are. Other states said it's referring out for extensive kind of psychiatric treatment before you check that box. And so we are going to have some difficulty branching out too far beyond this too quickly because state autonomy means that there's quite a few unique differences on how they view these services and how they'd work. That said, we have met with developmental disability agencies and others who also want to start measuring. And now that we have a software that allows us to just give people back their data in meaningful ways, we could do that for any agency. And so we've been in talks with a few different agencies and grant partners who say, can you help us measure easier? And we say, sure, that would be great for us to help with. So, yeah. Any other questions, comments? Oh, yes, please, Matt.
I'm right here. Could you just?
Oh,
there,
yep,
do
I'm
that.
sorry. So I'm curious about how to assess the openness of school districts to collaborate. Right?
Yeah.
Because it becomes that part, and I mean, I know that's a thing, but I've just had some experiences recently with districts who, are saying, okay, we have to spend this money, but we're going to provide as limited services and still meet the criteria of what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so trying to figure out how do we get them to be on board. I sat in an IEP of a young man with a intellectual disability and like, well, we gave him an interest assessment last year and it was this way. And then we gave another one to him this year and it was completely different.
Yeah.
And they're like, that's just really interesting. I'm like, no, it's not. Like, and like they're thinking it's valid and reliable and they're working off of that.
Yeah.
And so, what you're doing is really great. I want you to hear that. And I want to figure out how, maybe there's a way as agencies try and figure out what are the school districts that we partner with because they are on board. They're showing things like this that suggest that they should be a partner and we shouldn't. There are some, back to the employer openness concept. There's some we're going to work with and some we know we have a lot of work to do.
I love that. And I love that coming from you because I think of Stenstrud and the employer openness scale and some of the work that's been done there. And a school openness scale sounds really interesting. One thing I want to point out, and I don't know if this is a fair answer to your question, if it's not, follow up. But we found that data is causing more openness. When a VR agency can actually show that when we do a service, we create change in a positive way. We've had school partners, mostly in Utah, because they've been using it the longest, but they're saying, oh, I've kind of not given a lot of credit to VR in the past, but you're showing change in all these areas that we deeply care about. I'm becoming open. And I think, of course, it could go the other way as well. You're not showing change. I'm open, but maybe not with you. I think that's all good for us in some ways. I don't think accountability is something we should shy away from. Again, we don't want to use these as punitive tools, but as guides for who you want to partner with isn't a terrible thing. I mean, I review ratings probably too much when I buy a dishwasher. There's nothing wrong with ratings helping us understand who would be the best partner in a certain situation or emphasis. But one thing I do know, just starting to measure has caused education agencies to open their doors with more trust and belief in the product that we offer. And that gets back to something Tim Tansey talked about earlier too. We're having a hard time telling our state leadership, our Congress, our governors that we have value. Well, let's measure that value. I think that's the easiest way to show value is to demonstrate it empirically. We're out of time. We want to respect your time. We're in the Great Hall, so it's probably being used for something right after this. But thank you so much. We really appreciate it.